Welcome to Unholy Vibes. I'm your host, Alex, and today we have another special guest, Blake Edward Andrew. Blake, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let the people know what you do, and I'll let you get into it first, and then we'll discuss some of how we met.
Thanks for having me. I am author Blake Edward Andrew, an indie author. Behind me is my debut novel, The Haunting of Chateau de Mornay. It has been out for 6 months now. It is book one of a horror, paranormal, gothic romance, spice, mystery, and history trilogy that I'm writing. You can barely see it, but book two is over here. I'm writing this currently, so I'm right in the middle of the trilogy. Like I said, it's been out for about 6 months. Overwhelmed with how it's going. I sell most of my books on TikTok. I do a live show every weekday from 12 to 3 selling and also signing books from the day before. My following is growing fast. Sales are going nice. Book is going awesome. Like I said, I went into this not knowing what I was doing. It's going really well, but I'm also a big horror fan. I love horror novels. I love horror movies, ghost stories. I will tell you right ahead, I am a skeptic when
Hmm.
it comes to spirits and the paranormal and such, because I've only had one unexplainable slash weird experience in my life. And nonetheless, I still love writing about it. I love talking about it, even though I haven't had a bevy of experiences. It's
Yeah,
still fascinating.
I agree 100% because I'm very similar to where I have healthy skepticism, but I wouldn't consider myself a skeptic. I haven't had much happen to me. I'm just
Yeah.
fascinated by all of it. And I think that's okay. We can be fascinated by something even if we haven't had our own experience, right? First of all, I love the cover art for your books. It's so cool. That's something that usually draws me in. Bring it up nice and close. Show the people. I'll put pictures up too. If yeah. Yes, that's awesome. And the second one, the poster, that's also very creepy. I love it. I love horror. When I stumble okay, so first of all, how we stumbled upon each other, I was on TikTok just perusing, going through different lives, and I happened upon yours, and it's my go-to to just start talking to people and say, "Hey, have you ever seen a ghost or had a spooky experience?" I ask because I do this podcast, blah blah blah. And a lot of the times people have experiences. And with yours, it was like we didn't really get into your personal experience. It was more of like, okay, you have something, but also you're a horror author, which is very interesting. So it's like, I got to get you on the show, show the people what you got going on, hear about the book, hear about the process, and then dive into your scary story. That can be our finale. Give us a lowdown of what your book is about, what inspired you to start, and your process, and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, I'll give you the pitch I memorized. I've done it 20,000 times. I've been doing it for 6 months on TikTok. It is the synopsis that's on the back of the book. It's only two sentences. So I started out with an abandoned French chateau, a warren of death during the French Revolution, is purchased by a grief-stricken couple hoping to convert it into a hotel to aid in their recovery. However, a powerful spirit resides within that catapults their lives down a path to madness. If you like paranormal, gothic horror, romance and spice and everything not nice, thrills, chills, kills, mystery, and history, that is what awaits you in The Haunting of Chateau de Mornay, book one of my haunting trilogy. So there
Fantastic.
it
I love it. I'm interested. I just love all sorts of horror, everything, right? Books, comics, movies, anything and everything in between. Quick question. So you're doing a trilogy, you said. What's the name of the second one again?
The second book is The Haunting of Anna Stone. Anna Stone is the main character in the trilogy.
I was going to ask, how do they all connect? There's one main character going through all of this, but it's not
Yeah,
all
one
in the same location?
right. It's one main character, and it does focus around her and changes that she's going through without saying too much about it. Book one, she has these powers that are starting to develop. They're very mysterious. Book two, we delve really heavily into what those are. And so far, I've been mum on revealing what kind of powers those are or where direction she's going in. So yeah, the trilogy is interrelated. She's the main character, but the second book has a new plot, new characters involved that she's involved with. Also different, a little bit different time period than what is in the first book. And so that's another kind of teaser that I'm tossing out there for people. A lot of people think the timeline's just going to continue. French Revolution, 1789, 1790, not necessarily. I love to jump around in time. We're not talking time travel. We're not talking time machines necessarily. We're just talking, I write in the third person and I can take these people wherever I want to take them. And
Right.
so that's where we're going.
That's awesome. Well, my interest is piqued, so I'm definitely gonna be checking this out, and I'll probably buy a couple extra copies, or maybe we can figure something out, like getting a signed copy to give away for the show. I'm fascinated. I love a good period piece horror. What inspired you to take this journey into writing and then also make it this specific story, French Revolution era, this, setting, this era? What took you there?
I've been writing since I was a kid. People ask me, when did I start writing? I say the second grade. I had a class assignment. We were just learning how to write cursive and show off our artistic abilities. So I had to write this little like 10-page book and we made covers with it. And my first book was called The Haunted House. So I grew up in the early 80s. We had a haunted house in our neighborhood where back then there were condemned houses. They weren't fenced up. You could just go in and it was Disneyland for a 10-year-old
Yeah,
kid and his friends.
why not,
So
right?
we didn't know what we were going to find in there. We found all kinds of weird stuff. There's graffiti everywhere. You could fall through the floorboards. They didn't care back in the 80s. Like, they didn't care.
Just
So,
kids
well,
having
Tommy,
fun, you know?
does he need stitches? I don't know. I think he's okay.
He'll be fine.
Um,
Rub some dirt in there.
I've always been fascinated by haunted houses. Ghostbusters came out when I was 11. We played Ghostbusters in abandoned houses in our neighborhood. I've gone to Europe. I've been in those castles. I've been in old buildings and felt very, very strange feelings where I felt never felt like that before. And that inspired me to set this book in Europe in an old chateau. Initially, the story, like I said, my whole life, I've been writing mostly for myself. I've never published anything. I've written some screenplays. I've entered some contests. I pitched to Bloomhouse one time. That was a big deal. It was a fun experience. I was really inspired by reading an article about people going to Europe, buying old buildings and castles that are falling apart. History is destroying them. Nobody's taking care of them. These people have money and they're buying them and then they're putting a lot of money into restoring them and bringing them back to what they used to look like. And that just absolutely blew my mind for a haunted house tale. I had a haunted house desire to write, but nothing was coming to mind. What could you do that hasn't already been done? It's a tough subgenre. There's classics out there, Hell House, and there's so many great Shining, so many great haunted house stories.
It's a
So I was like,
saturated
okay,
market.
oh yeah, very saturated and difficult to make original. So I just ran with that idea. Let's not set it in the United States. Most of my audience is going to be American. Let's put it in Europe. So that's already going to be kind of an unusual new experience for readers. I was always fascinated by the French Revolution period of history. I studied it in college. I was always fascinated by the violence of it, how brutal it was. They beheaded their monarchs and they killed thousands with a guillotine. It was just brutal humanity. And it really inspired the governments of Western civilization from thenceforth. I was fascinated by that. I was like, okay, I'm going to make an old chateau built in 1681, pre-revolution. I had to come up with like the Brad and Janet, like a Rocky Horror Picture Show. Who are they going to be, like the unsuspecting Americans that are walking into this situation, and they're walking into this chateau that has had really, really violent, horrible past, but they don't know that necessarily. In the book, when they're touring, it's kind of hinted at. The seller is like kind of mysteriously giving them like little clues about things that happened, but she knows a lot more than they do, and she's not telling them everything. And so they start renovating, they start digging up the past, and the past is really dark. So yeah, that's pretty much where the inspiration came from. I wanted to bring that knowledge and feeling I had of going into those old buildings and castles in particular in Europe, bringing that feeling into the chateau. And so I've had a lot of readers say that they really felt like they were there. I try to describe like viscerally, sensorily, like what you're experiencing when you walk into the chateau or when these characters are walking in. I try to take that knowledge and bring it into there, giving it that extra creepy feeling as much as I possibly could. Also, trying to keep the story original by bringing a lot of history into it, jumps around in different time periods. I've had a lot of people say they've never read a book like this before, especially a lot of horror people. They're like, there's so many different subgenres going on. And I was like, excellent. That's what I was going
Yeah,
for.
that's all good, reviews, right? That's good. That's
I
high
call it,
praise.
yeah, I call it a hybrid fiction. Like I said, it's got paranormal, gothic horror. There's romance or spice in there. I'm a big Anne Rice fan. I loved her gothic feeling, her atmospheres, but I also loved her more of her spicy books that she wrote. And I read those when I was younger. And I wanted to bring that all into my novel, all those inspirations, all those feelings into one novel. So that's where they came from.
Excellent. And just for my information and those watching or listening, spice level, are we talking 18 and older this book is for? Okay, just wanted to be sure about that because not everyone
Yeah.
that listens is old enough.
It's in and over. But also, I tell folks that I've had people who never read a horror novel. For example, one of my moderators, my age, she's never read a horror novel. And she read this book and she said it's her favorite book of the year. Like, it's not too much. I try to balance everything out. There's not too much of anything in there. So I don't want to intimidate people by saying if you're an adult and you do not necessarily like spice that much, you can skip over those parts. There's not a lot of them.
It's
So
not gratuitous. It's balanced. Like,
no, it's definitely not gratuitous. I definitely left it in for it. There's those scenes that have story development, they have character development, and you learn more about people, what kind of people they are, and it's not gratuitous. No way, absolutely not.
no, that's great. There's books out there that it's like that's all it is, right? But like on purpose. Okay, so I just to give people an idea, because I want more people to read your book. How scary are we talking here? Is it just more of because you're saying it's like gothic. That makes me feel like the atmospheric kind of overall vibes are scary. Am I gonna be like, should I read this with the lights on? I mean, how scared are we looking to get here with these books?
I have that question come up a lot. I have a lot of people come on. That's their only question. It's like, how scary is this? And I always, just my experience explaining it, I always say it's subjective. I shot for more of the chilling, thrilling. It's more of a paranormal, psychological type of horror. There's a little bit of gore in it. There's some violence. There's some fighting in it, but it's not a slasher book. Nothing like that. It's not a splatter punk or anything like that. So
Right.
it's much more of a messing with your mind, thrilling, wondering what's coming next type of a thing, and jaw-dropping moments. I've had a lot of readers tell me that, which makes me really happy. So yeah, it's more of that type of a thing, more of a killer thriller.
Okay. I can get behind that. I love horror across the board for the most part. I really do like when you can lean more towards the thriller side of things. Like it's scary, but this is like a wild ride at the same time. It's not just scary for scary's sake. It's also an adventure. It's kind of a wild ride. And there's been a lot of horror movies that have been coming out that ride that line really well to where it's like, oh, this almost isn't a horror movie, but it is. And it just rides those lines. So I totally appreciate that like genre of horror thriller chiller, like you say. So that excites me. And I think a lot of people will be into that. You've been published for 6 months for book one. When are we looking at book two?
I'm planning to have it come out early next year. So being this is my first time, I've like book one was very different in terms of the process than book two. So now I have a deadline. I have fans clamoring for it, asking me all the time, when's it coming out? I can't wait to read it. I finished book one. I love that pressure. It makes me excited. And in terms of like, okay, I'm coming out with this. I need to write this thing that people are waiting for. I didn't have that with book one. So we're looking at early next year, about a year after book one came out, but I still have a lot of work to do in that time. And there's also the editor, there's ARC readers. I don't really know how long that process is going to take, but that's tentatively what I'm telling folks. And then book three, hopefully a year after that. So one a year is what I'm really hoping for. And it's a tight deadline, but I want to try to hold to it as much as I possibly can because as a reader, I've had to wait for book sequels and it hurts
Hmm.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And I want to do the best I can to make that easier for fans. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So you mentioned process between book 1 and 2 and the noticeable change due to fan pressure now. But other than that pressure and working under that kind of deadline and pressure, what has changed from book 1 to book 2? What is your process? How has it evolved?
it's far more disciplined now in terms of book one took me 7+ years to write it. I did not have a deadline. It was more of a fun thing to start with. I didn't know it was going to turn into a novel. I initially thought it was going to be a screenplay. And then I was like, wait, I've got a lot more detail here that I want to get into, and a movie is not going to necessarily do that. I want to take my shot at a novel. So I had that process with book one, but book two is far more disciplined. The outline is far more accurate. I'm writing more than I did in book one, like in terms of just like my writing speed, smashing 7 years into approximately 6 months, 6 to 8 months of trying to finish this book. And so I told the editor tentatively end of September, and I'm 1/3 through the book right now. So I've got a lot of work to do, but I've got it outlined really well. I stay up really late at night. I was up till 3 this morning, just getting stuff, getting that outline done, putting almost like space holder chapters, like this is what happens in this chapter. This is what happens in this chapter.
Mm.
Just really brief, just little explanations in terms of, okay, this is what I need to write, and getting it ready to write so that and I also don't write in order. I jump around based on what I'm feeling. What character am I feeling like writing today? What dialogue do I want to write? What interaction between characters do I want to write? So that frees me up in terms of not having to write like that next scene that maybe I don't want to write. If I'm not ready for it, I won't write it. I'll move on
Right.
to something else.
So the overall vision for the story is there. Like you have it all outlined. And I
Yeah,
like that idea of being able to, okay, I know what's gonna happen here, but I don't wanna write that right now, and just kind of
right.
jumping around. That's I feel like if I were ever to write, that's probably how I would do it, like, let's just kinda jump around and feel out, what's comfortable in the moment or what you're inspired to do, right? When you first started the first book, you said it took 7 years. Did you have an idea of how all 3 books would go, or were you like, "Let's finish book 1 first, and then I'll kind of figure it out," or did you already have the overall vision for the whole trilogy?
No, that's a great question. I had this as a standalone. It really was. And as I got near the end of writing it, I was almost mourning the future because I was like, I love this so much. I'm having so much fun writing this. I don't want it to end. And so as I was getting near the end, I'm like, okay, I really started putting a lot of thought into where can I take this? Like, where could it go further? And I decided early on, I don't want a long series. I don't see myself ever writing a long series of books. I love standalones, and like a trilogy is pretty much as long as I would go. I love a trilogy. Trilogy is just a really great way to tell a longer story into 3 parts. And so as I got near the end of writing book two, was writing the end of it, I was like, you know what? I've got some ideas here for continuing this. And one part of book two is, and one thing I stumbled upon is I had written a short story about 20 years ago. Actually, I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what? That actually will fit into book two perfectly. So I had that story. I went back. Somehow I had the digital file after 20 years. I have no idea how it stayed alive. It's still there. Been carting around this Word doc with me digitally for 20+ years. And I read it again. I'm like, yep, this will work. And I rewrote that. I rewrote it with, I'm a very different writer now than I was 20 years ago. And I also wanted to continue the tone of book one so that it's not just like a completely unusual, different writing style
Right,
that
right.
like I had 20 years ago. So I rewrote it and have run from that. and the story is going in a direction I'm super excited about. I get to bring in that old story that I wrote, the character that I was really excited about back then that I didn't do anything with it. And so that's really something I'm looking forward to. Is people are really going to be surprised at where book 2 is going after book 1.
That's awesome that you're able to take that 20-year-old thing and make it fit into what you have now. That's really cool. And that made me think of another thing I wanted to ask. When you're compiling all of your ideas and your inspirations and your writing, and you stumble upon something like this where you're like, "Oh, I have this thing. How can I make this fit?" And when it all comes together, do you feel some sort of like writer's high when you're able to make all the pieces fit together and synchronize beautifully? Like, does that really just get you going?
Oh yeah, tremendously. It's that is an amazing feeling. Like for example, like we just talked about, like bringing that piece in and having it fit. Like it literally is like I like to think of my writing as a jigsaw puzzle, and I have all these pieces all over the place, and I'm basically putting this section together with the pieces. You put the corner together because you can kind of see what's happening in the picture, but you don't really know how the rest of it's going yet. You just have a bunch of little pieces and stuff. And this piece was already like done and merged. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, this is a great starting point. I'm going to put that, it's not in the corner. This is going to go right in the
Whoa.
middle. Started with that. And then I'm a big outliner and, plotter and versus pantser, but I always give myself room for improvisation and inventing things as I'm going. For example, last night I wrote something that I didn't see coming at all. But as I was writing, it just kind of flowed out and just happened organically. And I'm like, this makes it even scarier. This is like a high stakes situation now. Like I just ended this chapter with an oh my God moment. And that was like really exhilarating for me. I was like, okay, I need to go to bed now, but I'm like, now I'm all pumped up and like,
Yeah.
how am I going to sleep now? Like, I'm so excited about this. So yeah, you definitely get that exhilarating high from when it starts coming together. And you read or you wrote something you just wrote, and you're loving it. It sounds good. You're enjoying it. It's very exhilarating.
It's solving a puzzle of your own making, some sort of way. Like you said, the pieces are all there. You just have to make them fit. Now, on the opposite end of things, what's the process you go through when you run into some sort of writer's block, or maybe you have different pieces, but you can't make them fit together? How do you approach that?
Well, the writer's block question is that I ran into that back when I was doing screenplays. I wrote 8 or 9 over a period of probably 5 or 6 years. And that's where I learned the technique of not writing in sequence. So screenplays are really easy to just write a real quick scene. Like here's the scene location, the setting really quick. Here's what's happened in the scene, and then we move on to the next one. So jumping around in the story, when I ran into writer's block with the book, I would just stop and move ahead, write that next section later on in the book that I already know is going to happen. I feel good about it, and then go back later on and put it together. And just being aware of where it needs to go and making sure that it's in the right spot. And yeah, that really helps get over that writer's block. And then, but also bridging those pieces together can be a little tricky, like you mentioned. You've got two major plot points happening. How do you make them come together? Those can be a little tricky sometimes. Those are like little areas that you may not want to write, or how do you make them exciting? That was a challenge I ran into, was between two sections. You don't want it to be boring. Like you
Yeah.
don't. I don't want to write something that I think is crap, or that I'm not excited about. So that's another thing that took me a long time, 7 years, is like, okay, what do I want to put in there that's going to make it interesting? So that's a challenge too when you're writing in that style, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure you come from a perspective of, would I enjoy this if I was reading it, right? I do that as well when I listen to other people's stories, and it's like, if I were listening to this, would I be interested by this kind of thing? So, no, that is fascinating. And then follow up to that though, when you're storyboarding and putting the pieces up there, have you ever run into a point where you just couldn't make anything work and you ultimately had to scrap some pieces of a story, or do you do everything you can to keep it all in?
I do everything I can, but there is a limit to that. Like I have like a master file where everything goes and it's all out of order and it's a mess. My notes are in there. And what I do is if I write something, I'll leave it in there. Like I have some stuff in there right now for book two, for example, that's I just wrote it. I'm not sure it's going to fit anywhere. It's just something that I felt would be really creepy and a cool interaction between a couple of characters, maybe. What I do is I leave it in there, but I highlight it in red. That's my signal of, okay, this is a questionable section. I
Mm,
will probably take this out, but I leave it in there because I don't want to delete it. I just leave it in case it does come back to me. I'm somewhere else in the novel. I'm like, oh, this is going to fit right there. Copy or cut, paste, more like, and bring it in there, tweak it so that it's kind of like rewiring what I just wrote to make sure they all fit in together. So that's part of writing that I really love. I don't know if a lot of people write that way, but it's mood writing. I write when I'm in the mood for it. It may not fit in with anything in the story at all. Like I wrote a lot of the ending of book one. There was a lot of different endings actually. I had a lot of red sections
interesting.
that were possibly, they were maybe more just made the scenes longer. That was probably why I took a lot of it out, is because I didn't want to draw on the end of the story. Like this is what everybody's been waiting for. I don't want the end to be super long. So I truncated some things that really didn't, I felt like really didn't help. But yeah, I leave those pieces in there. I hold on to them as long as I can, really, just in case. You never
Hey,
know what you might be.
yeah, well, I mean, 20 years later, you might be like, "Oh, hey, I need to take this section for the next thing," you know? No, I think that's a good practice because you never know when that draft of some idea may spark something else or fit different storyline perfectly, right? That's how I'm
So
understanding it. So that's really cool.
yeah.
And then through your writing process with this back to the pressure of book one is out, book two you're trying to get through. When it comes to your process and discipline, what are you doing for yourself to make sure you are progressing in your writing process? Because I know I've talked to other people where it's like, "Oh yeah, I'm writing," and it's like, "Well, how much you've written?" They're like, "Nothing," or "Only a couple pages," and it's been like 5 years. It's like, "Are you writing though?" So what do you the question I guess I should say is, what do you do to keep yourself on track and make sure you're getting something done?
Great question. So visually, I love to see the end product. So you'll see up here, right there, that's the book cover for book two. And we had that early on. We knew what it was going to be. I had a poster printed of it. And I did that for book one too. I don't know if you can see it. There's a black and white chateau sitting back here. There's a black and white print of the first book back here. We initially were going to make it black and white. I have posters made and I put them right in front of my workspace. And that is my inspiration. I can't escape it. It's in my writing area. I see it all the time. And it's basically my way of telling me from the future, Blake, you need to write this novel. Like it's waiting to be written and you need to do it. And that's all I need, quite honestly. Like just being that visual reminder. I forget things if they're not in front of my face. Like I'll leave the house without my wallet, without my keys. I have to put them in just the right spot. So her being right here, that's a big inspiration for me. Every day I wake up, I'm like, there it is. I got to work on it. And I'm also not one of the writers. I find that I feel like I break a lot of writer rules that I've come across. I've had so much advice and I tailor everything to what works for me. And I always tell other writers, I'm by no means, I just tell them, do what works for you. Don't have to listen to everybody. Do what works for you. Just practice what works for you. So that's what I end up doing. And I don't write every day. I don't force myself to write every day. A lot of people say you should write something, whatever it is, every day just for practice. And I don't like to practice. Like, I don't like to be forced to do something I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Like maybe you don't want to practice going and playing a basketball practice someday. Well, when you're in charge of the whole thing, you don't have to. Like when you're an indie writer, I don't have to do that. And so the primary reason I don't is because I find that when I'm forced, I don't write the quality that I want. And it's been obvious to me. And so I write, I'll go a week without writing, unfortunately. Like right now, that's a really, really bad time to be doing that. But sometimes I'll go a whole week without writing, and then I'll write like 20 pages, 30 pages in like 2 days. Like the torrent of everything just comes right out, and then I'm exhausted. I'm like, okay, I need a like 3 day break from that. So yeah, that's another part of the process. Is I don't force myself to write.
You know, like you said, do what works for you, and I totally agree with that. Everyone works differently. There's not one solution for all, right? So I think approaching it like that in a way, in a manner that is going to work for you, you're still writing, you're still getting something done. It's just when the vibe is right, when you feel like it. And
Yeah,
I think you're going to be more productive when you're in the mood and you're inspired than, like you said, you're doing it because you feel like you have to and your writing suffers. So
yeah,
I get it. I mean, not nearly the same, but kind of like similar principle. When I do editing, there's some days where it's like, I do not want to edit. I'll spend 8 hours on a video and it's grueling sometimes. So I get it.
ah, geez,
And so I'll
yeah,
sometimes in my season one, I would wait till like the day of publishing to do everything. And I hated it, and I was like, "Dang it, past me, why did you do this?" But it just was what felt right, and I bust through it, and I felt really productive, and I did it. I was like, "Dang, I actually did okay." But yeah, I need to start doing something like that with like a visual reminder, and I think that's a great thing to do. You have your cover. The book is there. You just need to bring it into existence, and you just need
exactly,
to put the words in a book, right? You need to write it. So I like that idea of being like future me is going to be really happy when I'm done because it's already there. I like that idea.
exactly,
No, I
yeah,
really like that.
yeah.
I'll have to take a page out of your book and do that for myself with my my show. I'm so funny. So anyway, after you're done with your trilogy,
No, I said excellent pun work there. Got it.
thank you, thank you. I have my moments. I'm a dad. Dad jokes. Um, After you're done with your horror trilogy, do you think you'll continue to write more horror stories? Do you want to explore other genres, or you feel pretty comfortable where you're at?
I someone asked me that the other day, and they said, if you didn't write horror, what would you write? And I said, gosh, I that's a really good question because I after this trilogy, I have a standalone horror novel I would love to write. Like something came up while I was writing. Actually, it was a few months ago. I had an idea, and I want to write that book. But that question that person gave me was like, if you took horror out of it, what would you write? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. You take the horror out, it's so much of what I write. Would I write just a romance novel? I don't think so. Maybe possibly a historical fiction novel. So yeah, it would be more of like possibly historical fiction, but it would be so tempting to just throw in that paranormal aspect. Like it would just be, I don't know if I could do it. Like I really don't. I don't know if it would be interesting enough for me, to me as a writer slash reader to be like, I don't know if I could make this interesting enough. So much of my DNA is built around horror and paranormal. I just possibly science fiction, maybe. I thought about that a little bit, but that's another one. I just don't know. I love horror so much. I definitely would want to. I definitely would want to continue with that. I want to be known as a horror novelist,
Right,
as
right.
like when I'm dead and gone and buried and stuff. I
Yeah,
don't want to be remembered as a romance novelist necessarily. The
right.
horror is for me.
Well, no one's no one's asking Stephen King about his romance novels, you know what I mean?
Well, he writes fantasy too. He has he has his own fantasy line that he wrote. I don't know if he still writes.
Oh,
Pen
yeah, he
name
did
and everything.
the Dark Tower, right?
Yeah, the Dark Tower, but he had a whole new another fantasy line. I seem to remember like dragons being involved
Ooh.
and Stephen King. He just wrote under a pen name. I remember reading it a long time ago.
Well,
Talking about in the 90s.
I was just trying to agree with your principle of, like, that's what you wanna be remembered at, right? That guy, like, that's your
Absolutely.
that's your thing, and I get that. I mean, I totally get that. You wanna do what you like. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm all for it. Keep writing horror. If you have another one in mind, just yeah, I'd say go for it. You know, do your thing. As far as like you said you've written some screenplays. Would with all the things you have written, would you ever want to see your book adapted into like a show or a movie or something like that?
Yeah, totally. That's kind of my dream. Almost more than getting like a publisher contacting me. I would be more excited because I'm such a movie fan.
Mm,
I would be so excited. I have so many people. This happens almost every day on my live show on TikTok. As someone says, "Is Netflix going to pick this up? Is Hulu going to pick this up?" And I always say, "God, I would love that. Like, if it was a movie, that would be cool. But I would love to see it as like a limited series. Like,
yeah.
I feel like book adaptations are best served when you've got all that extra time. And I've had a few inquiries about film rights. I've had people email me about it, and that's been a fun conversation, but nothing's really come from it. I don't have an agent. I'm handling it all myself, but I'm holding on very tight to what I have and building my brand, building my name up, and doing the best I can. And that's ultimately that would be my dream. Like I said, is to have like a helicopter lands in front of my house and like out comes like the executive from Netflix or some very very rich individual. I want to turn your book into a series.
Mm,
Oh, let's do it.
yeah.
Let's do
Yeah.
it.
No, that
That would
sounds
be
that
great.
that would be the dream, and I agree with you as far as the adaptation style. These kind of things I think would do they do better in limited run, like it's like an 8 episode season, right? Instead of an hour and a half movie. You just can't you just can't do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, a limited series is I think the perfect route for something like this, and I hope to see it happen someday. I believe in you. I hope to be watching this on whatever streaming service in a few years. And after your final book comes out in a couple of years, or at least another, whenever you're planning to have book three out, maybe something will happen. Your popularity is only going to grow. Crazier things have happened. I mean, let's see it happen.
Yeah, that's my primary, like that's why I do all the interviews, I do all the podcasts. I never turn these things down. I did one right before yours. That's why I was a little late coming here. But yeah, I just my main strategy is do everything I personally can, work as hard as I can to get it out there, make sure I'm live. You never know who's watching on TikTok. There's millions of people on there. You never know who's going to be there. Just as a side note, as part of that, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Haunting Adeline, but it's a really popular dark romance slash haunting book right now. The author's H.D. Carlton. She's getting huge, and she showed up on my live a couple months ago, and she bought my book. And like I saw her come up, and I was like, oh my gosh. And my moderator was texting me. She was like, oh my gosh, AC Carlton is in your live right now. Like, I was like, oh my God. So that was like kind of a cool moment. She's kind of a big writer. And so going along with, you never know who's going to be there.
Yeah,
You never know who's watching. They make
absolutely.
themselves, it's just getting yourself out there is the best thing you can do.
Agreed. I mean, why do you think I'm jumping around all these lives talking to people, right? Doing the same thing, just trying to I'm in it for the love of the game. Like, that's genuinely I'm in it because I love all things scary, spooky, horror, all of
Mm.
it. So, I want more. I want more. I can never get enough. I
Yeah,
have
exactly.
an insatiable appetite for the terrifying and the scary because I don't find it terrifying. I'm just interested. I'm fascinated. I love talking about it. If you're okay to transition here, I'd love to hear about your personal experience that you were kind of hinting at earlier. If you're ready to go on to that, you tell me.
Yeah, that's totally.
Okay, let's
Um,
hear it. Yeah.
so yeah, so this is like I said, I am an open skeptic. Like I call myself, in the Scully and Mulder spectrum of skeptic versus I am a believer. I am more of a Scully, but I do have a little bit of I want to believe. I want to have that contact. I would love to experience that, but I can't say I really ever have, except for this one time. So before I moved, I'm in Eugene, Oregon now. Before I moved here, my family was in Idaho. and we were in a small town called Pocatello, eastern Idaho. And while I was writing this novel, I quit my career of 25 years to continue and actually finish this novel because it became my passion. I fell in love with it. But by quitting a career like that, I was stepping into the unknown, the void, and I had to find work to pay my bills. So I was doing a lot of gig work, driving, delivering. I was doing Lyft for a while in Pocatello. And so I found myself often at the airport, which is only about 15 minutes out of town. And I was waiting there off at the curb, really small airport. I'm right there waiting for my phone to ding and say, hey, someone's, hailing the cab. And I was watching this individual kind of just standing there, and he looked really confused and out of sorts. And it was really unusual because he was an older gentleman. I want to say like maybe in his 70s, maybe first possibly early 80s, but he looked like he was from a 40s noir movie. Like
Okay.
he was wearing 40s suit. He had a fedora on. He had an old time suitcase. And it was just that in itself was bizarre to me. So I kind of made eye contact with him, and he like waved at me, and he walked over, rolled my window down. He goes, he had like a Boston accent or something like that, and he was like, "Hey, are you a taxi? Kind of. Do you have a phone? I do a taxi thing through the phone. It's this thing called Lyft." And he goes, "Well, I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is, but can I just give you $20 and you can drive me into town?" I'm like, "Yeah, technically not supposed to do that, but why not? That's cool." So he was an older gentleman. So I got out and I picked up his suitcase and put it in the back in the trunk, and then he got in and stuff, and we started driving. And so the usual chit chat, like, where are you from? Where are you going? I remember I don't remember exactly where he said he was from, but it was definitely somewhere else in the country, like more like the East Coast, Midwest, something like that. Well, where are you going? Are you visiting family in town? Like, what's going on? He literally said, "I don't know why I'm here."
Okay.
And I was like, okay. So do you have a, like you said, you don't have a phone? Like, how are you going to get a hold of somebody? And he goes, "Well, all I have is this address on this piece of paper." Okay, what's the address? So he handed me the little piece of paper and had the address on it. And I put it into my GPS thing. I'm like, okay, this is where we're going. And talked to him more. And he was really obsessed with a racetrack. He was like, "Do you guys have a racetrack in town?" And I was like, "It just so happens we do. We're a small town, but we're also very rural, and we have a horse track. Like, you can go to the horse track and bet." He was like, "Excellent. Like that, that's what I love to do. I really want to bet on the dogs or the horses or something like that." And I was like, "Oh, cool. All right." So driving more and more. "You have any family?" "No." So just making sure that the guy was okay. Like, "Are you meeting somebody?" "Nope. I don't know anybody. I just have this address." Okay. So I started getting chilled at that point. Like, this is just a really bizarre situation in itself, but the full magnitude of it didn't hit me until later on. So we drive up into town. There was more conversation, but I don't really remember it so well. I just remember the kind of like the highlights of it, the things that really kind of
Yeah.
bothered me. We pull up to one of the oldest houses in the town. Like, we're talking an original historical house. Like, it had the deck, it had the porch with the cover on it, covered porch and the columns. It just looked like an old house. And I'd never seen it before. And he goes, "Well, this is it." So we got out, and I carried his suitcase up to one of the steps, went up to the front door, and I just kind of glanced in through the windows, and it was totally dark inside. There was nobody inside this house. I was like, "So are you staying here? Like, it doesn't look like there's anybody here." And he goes, "Yeah, there's a boarding house. Like, there's a room in there for me." Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, interesting. So he said, "Hey, thanks for the conversation. Here's an extra 20." He gave me two real $20 bills. These were not dollar bills from the 40s. These were real. I didn't know what to expect. I started driving away, and I looked back a couple times, and he wasn't even attempting to go inside. He was staring at me. He was watching me as I drove away. And I looked in my mirror and he was still watching me. And that's when it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, like this, I just chill, just absolutely for the first time in my life, just boom. Like immediately I felt like the first thing that came to my mind is I had just transported someone from like one plane of existence to another or something like that. Like he had just passed away. And the more I thought about it, I was like, he was crossing the river Styx and I was Charon or something like that. Like I was the transporter, and somehow I was able to communicate with the spirit, but everything about him looked completely real to me. The suitcase was real. He gave me real money, but the way he looked, the way he acted, he didn't know anybody in town. The boarding house was empty. I was just chilled to the bone for the rest of the day. And I will never forget that experience. I've been thinking about it for many years. It's been probably about 6 years since it happened. And yeah, that's really been my only possible, like, you know, some people see, maybe a mist or something like that. Like it might be a ghost. This was a real man, a real individual who I felt really weird about. And being a skeptic, my first thought wasn't, oh, this is a ghost. Like it has to go through many layers of my inquisition before I get to I just talked to a ghost. You know what I mean? I'm that skeptical. So yeah, it was it was so weird.
That is that
Really
is
was.
bizarre. That is
Yeah.
bizarre, because here's the thing, this is the thought I had the whole time, I'm like, you just picked up, like, a dementia patient, drove them across town, but at the same time, it's just who knows? This is so bizarre. What even is that, right? I mean, he had cash on him, so it all kinda worked out, right?
The way he seemed so disconnected, it's like, how did he navigate the airport? That's so bizarre to me. He didn't have a phone. Like, how do you exist in today's world without a phone? I thought that was so bizarre
Yeah,
as
and for
well.
him to just say, "I don't even know what I'm doing here,"
Yes,
and
yes.
here's an address on a piece of paper, like, I don't even know. I don't even know. I'm just trying to, like, put it all together in my head. That is
It's
fascinating.
chilling to think about. I get chills when I look back on it, and this individual was in my car, and that really
And then
weird.
and then he just stared at you as you left.
Yeah,
So
it was those little details that really like pushed it over the edge for me. Like you said, like one possibility could have been a dementia patient, an elderly gentleman with dementia, but he was also very collected in his conversation with me. He was obsessed with this racetrack. It's like, okay, he came to town to haunt this racetrack, maybe. Like maybe that's why he was there.
maybe,
He didn't
yeah,
know why.
yeah. The haunted
So,
racetrack, there you go.
like maybe he had a case full of cash, that he was going to take to the track,
Maybe he
and
did give you an
that was
extra 20, right? So,
it was an endless suitcase of cash,
we
and
love
like
that.
that was it was spend eternity at the racetrack betting on horses. Maybe that was his rest of existence in the plane.
Yeah, maybe.
So
So this makes me curious now, though. I wanna find this address, this boarding house, if you will. In Pocatello, you said?
yeah, Pocatello. Of course, I don't remember the address, but I'm sure if you looked around on the Google Maps long enough.
Pocatello has some haunted stuff showing up, so that makes me think Pocatello may be pretty haunted, I don't know. I wanna lean towards, like, maybe this was supernatural, because if it wasn't, then, like, there's just some confused guy you dropped off somewhere, which is
Yeah,
kind of a bummer. So, being the skeptic, the believing skeptic, or whatever you wanna call it, what is your background as far as, like, did you grow up with any sort of, like, religious background to kind of set a baseline for your belief or skepticism, or what? Give me some insight here.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in a religious family at all. My family I mean, for generations going back, is actually LDS, Mormon. And my dad was the first one in the family to actually like leave the church.
Mm,
And as he was getting older, there were so many things that he just didn't believe in, that he wanted to participate in anymore. So he quit the church. And he always inspired me and always pushed me to be a free thinker, think for myself, explore things, but just be an explorer with an open mind. And when it came to religion, explore all those religions. So I've gone to so many different kinds of churches, trying to find that religion that maybe might fit me.
Mhm.
And when I got into college, I started studying more world religions outside of Western civilization, more Eastern religions and Japanese and Hinduism and Jintoism and stuff. And nothing still has stuck. So yeah, I definitely didn't have that growing up. And I'm more of a science minded individual. That's what I mean. Like that's where a lot of my skepticism comes from. I want to find a scientific explanation for everything,
Mhm.
some kind of real world explanation. The mystical, the spiritual part has never really landed on me. But I think that also really helps me have a really crazy imagination when it comes to writing books about the paranormal. Because I've had that very small experiences. It's just, I feel like that's almost been a good thing for me. I don't push any particular way of like dealing with spiritualism or anything like that. So anyway, yeah, just been I'm an explorer. I
Yeah.
really that's really what I am.
No, that's great. I am actually LDS myself. And, just baseline Christianity across the board, there's spirits and all that. So when it comes to like spirits and ghosts and demons and all this kind of stuff, that stuff doesn't scare me. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's
Mhm.
partially because of a religious upbringing. And not to say it would scare me if I wasn't religious. I just think about it differently. I think certain
Yeah,
people do. I don't know. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I don't really have any experiences. I'm not on that wavelength. I like to be a healthy skeptic. And I think you can be religious and still also be an explorer and be a free thinker because then that just shows like you have your belief, but you're open to all ideas kind of thing.
yeah, you're open minded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
being, like, religious and being, like, a closed-minded wiener about everything, no one likes that, you know? I mean, I do this podcast. It's funny, I was on a live on TikTok, stumbled upon some lady reading the Bible or something, I think, and I asked, like, "Hey, have you ever seen a ghost? I do this podcast," and she was, like, rebuking me for even having the name Unholy Vibes. She's like, yeah, God would not want me doing something unholy. And I'm like, whoa, hey, I'm not out here like promoting like anything.
Oh,
I'm just here to
wow.
talk with anyone of any belief. And I try and be respectful of all people's beliefs and views. And this lady was like, nah, dude, God doesn't want me doing that. Like, that's a bad thing. And I'm like, oh, geez. It's just the name alone she didn't like, and I'm like, "Okay, cool, okay, no, I'll move on." It was just like a weird interaction. I think that's not what I wanna be, you know? Like, how
Mhm.
dare you even talk about scary stuff? How dare you have a name like that? But it's like, no,
Yeah.
we're just out here having a good time. We're out here exploring, we're out here learning and listening. I've had people of all different walks of life on the show. And I love to hear everything they have to say, no matter what.
Yeah.
Just all there is to it. So I totally appreciate and respect that you're an explorer and you're a horror buff and you're an author and you're awesome. And I'm so glad that you came
Yeah.
on the show and you told us about your book and your story. And I'm going to be thinking about this old man you gave a ride for a while. Um, and I'm going to want
Yeah,
to
I mean,
hope
look,
that it was
he
supernatural.
might be a if you look at it and do some of your research, I never really looked into it, but you saw haunted Pocatello already, and the whole time I lived there, I never explored any haunted anything. All I knew was that it was a really old immigrant town. There's a big railroad line that goes through it. There's like 10 railroad tracks that converge there. It's called like the Gateway City or something like that. And it's a ethnically really diverse rural area. There's a lot of Greek people there. There's a lot of Asian folks there. I was amazed at the melting pots
Right.
in Idaho in this location is because of the railroad line. And there's got to be a lot of haunted stories around the railroad and stuff. So
I'm
I
sure.
bet if you explore it, you're going to find all kinds of.
I am gonna take a deep dive into Pocatello. Anyway, I digress. Is there any other topics, any other things you wanna discuss or dive into? Do you feel pretty good?
No, I feel good. Yeah.
I do too.
No, great conversation. Yeah. I feel like we covered everything.
Excellent. Well, Blake, thank you again for coming on the show. Go ahead and tell the people where they can find you and where they can buy your book.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Primarily, like I said during the show, my main shop is on TikTok. I've chosen that for several reasons, but it's the only place I really sign my books. It's where all the versions of the book are available. I've got hardcovers, paperbacks. I've just this week started doing painted edges on the books, where the edges of the book, are you familiar with those at all?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the painted edges. Here's a black one, black paperback. Just goes really cool with the. So I've been doing that. So those are for sale as well. That just started. They're kind of like collector's editions. Some fans really love that stuff. So TikTok is a big one. Of course, I'm on Amazon. The ebook is there. The paperback is there. I also have a website, authorBlakeAndrew.com. That's another place you can go. I also have an Etsy shop. If you want to just put in my name or author Blake Andrew, you'll find it somewhere in there. But yeah, I'm in different locations. The book is online. It's on all the big box stores, Walmart and Target and Barnes and Noble. It's on all their websites.
Excellent.
But in terms of just selling, I like to be in control of the ones that, purchase through me. I get the little personal touch of signing them or personalizing them and then sending them out, and then interacting with the people is another reason why I love the live TikTok so much.
Yeah. And what is your handle for TikTok?
Author Blake Edward Andrew.
Okay, cool. I'll link it all in the description. But everyone
Sure.
listening and watching, be sure to check out all of his socials and get a copy of the book. We're probably going to do a little giveaway. So look forward to more details on that. I'd love to get out a couple signed copies, get some people
Absolutely.
into the genre, get them some new experiences. Blake, thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking a leap and coming on some random podcast that you've, linked up on TikTok. TikTok's great. We love it. So thank
No,
you. And everyone that's listening and watching, thank you for being here. Like I said, check out his stuff. And if you have any scary stories, you or anyone you know, be sure to reach out to me at Unholy Vibes Pod on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all of that. Or you can email unholyvibespod@gmail.com. I take anonymous stories as well. I've had a few people submit things anonymously because they're scared to have their face attached to the story because someone involved is still alive. And anyway, I'm in it for the love of the game. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I just want more horror stories. I want your true spooky stories. It doesn't have to be supernatural. Were you chased by someone? Did you have a near-death experience? Whatever it is, I want it. So please reach out. Thank you again all for listening. Blake, thank you again. And remember, everyone, stay spooky, and we'll see you next time.
This has been Unholy Vibes. Shadows linger, darkness thrives. Stay spooky.